And good evening once again, or good morning, as the case may be. Gosh, that sounds like a kind of an echo out of time, doesn't it? Good morning to the other side of midnight. That amazing, translucent, shimmery, kind of quasi-reality between imagination and all that other stuff, where we get to discuss things that normally, in the daytime, I guess you just can't discuss. What we're going to do this morning is a little housekeeping at the top of the show, and then we're going to go to my instant guest. I wasn't originally planning to have someone tonight, and this mic is again shimmering all over my shoulder. But the developments in the last few hours, particularly with this conference in Orlando, Florida, is so interesting that in fact it demands that we kind of pay some attention. So Tim's going to come on and give us a report, and we're going to kind of talk big picture stuff vis-a-vis ways to get back to Pluto in a lot less time than 10 years. But first, I have been very what's the word? Aberrant, lacking, missing in something that I really should do, which is to plug the archives. The archives we have at the other side of midnight are the ways in which people will be able to actually follow what we're doing without keeping the ungodly hours, certainly on the East Coast, for what we're doing. If you go to the other, if you go to the other side of Midnight webpage, on the right-hand side, you will see, if you scroll down just a little bit, you will see buttons which are marked subscriptions or listen. If you want to get into the archive, you have to subscribe. I think it's something like $5 a month, but that gives you unlimited access. Obviously, we're not going to allow people to just copy and send this all over the web, because that would defeat the purpose of having an archive, which is to support the production values of the show. But in fact, if you want to listen at a decent hour, as a friend of mine used to do in LA years ago, when he was listening to art, and when I would come on that other program, he would slip a CD into his computer and tape the show, and then as he was driving to work the next morning in LA traffic, he'd simply pop it on, and he'd sit there in the 2-hour parking lot, and he'd listen to Coast, and then on the way home, he would listen in the 2-hour parking lot to the other half of the show. So there's a lot of ways, a lot of asynchronous ways in which the archive is going to become increasingly valuable, because with the archive, of course, come the links to the images that we talk about. Remember, this is radio with pictures, and we're going to actually be talking about images later in the week, and then next week we're going to do something really interesting about images. But if you go to the archive, if you go to the right-hand side of the other side of Midnight page, and you subscribe, then you will be able to get notices. You'll be able to know when we do something really amazing. You'll be able to know when we have special guests coming up. You'll be able to tap into the time travel meme that Art is spreading over on his show. In other words, it's the perfect way to live an asynchronous life in an asynchronous world. Okay, that's out of the way. Now, I want to get to one substantive thing before we move over to Tim. I heard the tail end of Art's show with Rich Dolan. Now, I've respected Richard Dolan as an investigator, as a researcher, as an historian, as someone who's trying to do this business the right way. I respected him from the beginning. I still do. But I heard some things on our show coming from Dolan that I cannot quite square with my former dealings with him and our associations at various conferences and our exchange of data and emails over the years, because apparently he was attacking me for my stance on the so-called Comet Elenin a 3 years ago. And I guess one of the ways to resolve this would be if Dolan would come on my show and air his grievances for the full honor and ceremony of being on a major show and being a major guest like this. And then I have a chance to respond to any specific issues that he has with what our stance was, because I thought I was very clear. At no time when we're dealing with some of these really far-out possibilities like Alanine was not an average comet, but it was sent by someone to deliver a message. I mean, that was the thesis, that was the model. I'm very clear to label this kind of stuff as a scenario. And the only reason that we took this model at all seriously is because of the recurrence of the attachment to the orbital elements and parameters of Alanine of this one number, which is incredibly important in terms of geophysics in the hyperdimensional torsion field model, and that's that number 19.5, the number where NASA endlessly, ritually repeats the number in all manner of encounters and flybys and landings and launches, and has for decades, as Barra and I, basically documented in our joint book, Dark Mission. But it is so much bigger than singling out one particular incident as an example of, just blatant hoaxing, which I think is what Dolan said tonight, that he felt that any and everyone attached to the whole Alanine experience was just basically I think the term used was snake oil salesman. I haven't heard that one for a while. That's out of the 50s. The point is that, no, Alanine was something much more interesting, much more remarkable, much more prescient. And I'm perfectly willing to explain in detail our position, supported by, again, the numbers, if Richard wants to come on and talk about it. So I'm going to issue an invitation. I'm not prejudiced by some of the things I heard, because I have a feeling that Richard hasn't taken the time to go through what we have published or what we presented at a conference in Southern California around the time of the whole Alanine controversy. Anyway, if he wants to go through it, I'm willing to go through it on the air, because I believe our position is eminently defensible, and science is nothing if it's not to be defended. But it shouldn't have to be defended to just anybody. It should be defended to someone who has a carefully well-reasoned argument on the other side, who has reasonable credentials for having done some of this stuff before, which, of course, Dolan does, and to not approach the subject or the discussion from a mean-spirited perspective. In other words, we both respect each other's work. We both respect each other as individuals, as researchers, as authors, as people trying to get to the truth. And if we have differences on particulars, then let's air those, aside from some of the ad hominem stuff, which is the part and parcel of the so-called UFO, alien, anomaly, ET, other community. So, moving on. Was there anything else I wanted to do? Yeah, I guess we should probably, instead of having me read the paper, which triggered what I was going to talk about this morning in terms of this really interesting set of developments around a real space drive, I want to bring in my friend and colleague, Tim Ventura. Tim's bio is up on the main site. He's one of the experimenters in the so-called do-it-yourself anti-gravity field. He's got background in IT and electronics and computer science, and loves to experiment with wire and, a soldering iron and that kind of stuff, and set up a really interesting clearinghouse website called American Anti-Gravity. With no further ado, let's hear it for Tim Ventura.
Well, hello, Richard. Thank you for bringing me back on. It's a pleasure to come back and join you.
I'm just trying all kinds of weird ways to introduce people that I've known forever, so
yeah.
Don't mind me.
Well, this story is really interesting, actually.
You mean the story that appeared on Yahoo Today and AOL and...
I've been following, actually, these stories. Well, you know how gossipy the internet is, and so I'm not even sure where the original story started. I ended up in a paper called "Direct Thrust Measurements of an EM Drive and Evaluation of Possible Side Effects," which was written by Martin Timar. So I thought, I could try and give you kind of a rundown on it in kind of the best of my knowledge, I guess, as well as give you a little bit of background on the story. I guess one thing that's really important to mention is there really aren't a lot of folks doing real research in this area. And that probably goes without saying. But so the EM drive is something that Sonny White and NASA's EagleWorks has been working on. Your audience is probably a little bit familiar with them, right? And EagleWorks is kind of a, from what I understand, kind of a self-funded or non-funded organization within NASA where they have kind of NASA's sideways blessing, right? Like, you can research this stuff, just don't get too much publicity. And in fact,
Tim, I wouldn't assume anybody knows anything because this is such a shrouded and deeply secret thing, even in terms of the news stories, which is partly, I think, to confuse everybody so nobody knows what's real and what's not real. So why don't you back up and tell us who Dr. Sonny, what was his name?
Yeah, Sonny White, Dr. Harold White. He works at NASA, and he's taken over, I guess, kind of the remnants of the breakthrough propulsion physics, not the program itself that was shut down, but kind of the mantra, I guess, that they marched to, right?
Was that Mark Millis?
Yeah, and Mark Millis is still around, but he's just not working. That program was shut down a while ago. So Sonny is, to the best of my knowledge, he's really the only person in NASA doing anything in this area. And he does it kind of with their blessing. They don't give him a lot of funding, from what I understand. And if he gets negative publicity, from what I understand, he could get in big trouble for that, right? They're very sensitive about the publicity they give to this research. But
let me stop you there, because there was a very interesting disjuncture up until a few months ago. I think this spring, April, May, in that time frame, there were really good public connections between the research going on via the EagleWorks crowd and this extremely interesting EM drive field, the so-called, electromagnetic drive, which uses no fuel, no propellant, no rockets. It's just basically a kind of what's called a frustrum, which is a cone, sealed at both ends, and you pump microwaves into it, and it moves, or it tries to move.
I'll probably get myself in trouble for saying this, but NASA is, I would say, almost schizoidal when it comes to propulsion.
Let me finish where I was going. So everything was hunky-dory. We were getting reports from inside the belly of the beast, from Sonny White, from some of the people around him involved in the research. And if you want to mention them by name, you can. I don't want to, trip over any confidences. And then when all the news stories hit in the spring, including one that was making the rounds claiming that this group had invented warp drive, apparently NASA senior executives freaked out and sent commands down the line that these people could no longer talk about any of their research. And I'm not sure that even includes going to conferences. Like we're going to talk about this big conference coming up in Orlando. Yeah. I don't know whether the EagleWorks people are even there.
This is what I mean by schizoidal. For me, it really hit home. I was at a conference several years ago, and I was talking with one of NASA's senior propulsion scientists, one of the guys who develops the rockets, not in theory, but the guy who sits down and says, okay, we're going to build a rocket, it's going to do this, it's going to go here, it'll take this long. And this guy was talking to me, and at one point in the conversation, he was describing how long it would take to get to Alpha Centauri. He literally had tears come to his eyes. And he said, there's no way that we can do it with rockets, and I was just like, duh, yeah, duh. Okay, we know that. We've known that for, decades, right? So on the one hand, NASA knows beyond the shadow of a doubt if they want to ever do anything real in space, other than, robot exploration of the solar system, which they're doing pretty well at with conventional propellant. If they ever want to live the dream in terms of Star Trek or Star Wars or any kind of real science fiction type propulsion, they've got to get past rockets. You just can't be ejecting mass out the back end because you run out of it. You run out of it after, a few hours at the most, right? And that's a given. And they come up with these ideas like ion drives, okay? And so you're still ejecting mass, except instead of having a rocket that burns itself out in the matter of a few minutes, maybe you can run the thing continuously. You're using just a few atoms of, helium or hydrogen or something. You're charging and ejecting a few atoms at a time, and so you can create lots of thrust. These things they're real. They use them, but they don't generate much propulsion, and really they're kind of a dead end.
Wait. You're telling me that the EM drive is a dead end?
No. I'm saying that ion drives.
Oh, yes, of course, because you have to throw something away.
Yeah, it's an intermediary.
See, the reason I want to explain how the show's going to work. We had some other things scheduled tonight. We're going to defer them because I'm really into breaking news. And there's an awful lot of converging breaking news that the mainstream is not commenting on. They're putting stories out there, but there's no grand orchestration of what it means. You've got, Stephen Hawking suddenly hawking SETI to the tune of $100 million. You got the discovery of the first Earth-like planet 1,400 light years away. You got stunning images of ancient archaeologies on Pluto with a promise in the news tonight that there were going to be some mind-boggling revelations at the end of this week at the next press conference. Then you've got a sudden new spate of stories on anti-gravity drives, which would, of course, make rockets totally obsolete, would transform both terrestrial and solar system economics and basically turn us into a Type 2 civilization. And all of this is happening at the same time as we're moving at Warp 9 towards some political singularity as we've decoded the data on the NASA archives, all leading to something that kind of looks, Tim, like they're going to come clean on something really big.
I'll tell you, the EM drive, I learned about this by one of my contacts who knows Sonny. He knows Eagle Works, and he's well acquainted with them. And I was on the phone with him probably last year, and I said, I haven't heard much from them lately. I haven't heard much in terms of breakthrough propulsion lately. What's going on? It's been kind of quiet. And he started telling me, he said, Sonny has developed this system. He said he came up with a system, and I believe he said it uses a laser interferometer. But the idea was, he said, there are all these claims out there. This generates anomalous force. That generates anomalous force. You've got lots of inventors. Some of them are crackpots. Some of them maybe not. And we don't know. So he said, Sonny came up with a system to measure the warp effect of these devices. And that's what he's been studying. And I said, really? I was like, that's kind of interesting. So like the Searle effect generator, right? I was like, so, you put that thing in his measurement thing, and it'll tell you if it's actually warping space, if it's showing a warp effect. And he said, yeah. He said, so some of these are actually producing results. And, for me, that was brilliant. And I want to give Sonny all the credit in the world for that, because that was the genius of it. It's that simple. We take ideas that are already there and just test them and say, hey, is this doing anything? So this EM drive came out of that because, again, this contact had said this was one of the devices that was generating anomalous thrust. They would put measurements on this, and it was generating anomalous thrust. So it's kind of been percolating for a while, but what we have now is we have a replication of this experiment by Dr. Martin Timar. Now, I know Timar as well, and I've been told by several people, Timar is one of the few people in this area to keep an eye on. And they told me that before I met him, and when I met him, I understand why. He's young, he's brilliant, he's able to work on things within the standard theory, but he's also not afraid to bend the theory when he needs to. So, in many ways, he's got that drive, that pushes him forward. And so when he gets involved in something, he's also, again, very, very brilliant scientist. When he picks something like this to do a replication, I mean, that means there's more than just smoke there. He's seeing fire. He wouldn't go after this if there wasn't something there. So I think the fact that he attempted replication says a lot. But, also, I mean, they're posting on Reddit now. I think they're saying that they were getting, let me see, 284 to 330 times the thrust of a pure photon rocket. Now, this is micronewtons, right? It's 20 micronewtons is what he claimed that he got in terms of thrust. That's not a lot.
But see, this is where everybody, I think, is going wrong, because even the weight of a feather in a vacuum in 0G ultimately adds up to an incredible velocity. So it's not a matter of its individual engine efficiency if you gang them together. Like, remember how von Braun was putting big rocket engines in clusters? Because each individual engine was limited by the technology of the 1940s. So he invented the concept of the clustered rocket. Well, you could do clustered M drives, each one having a little thrust, but you add them all together, you get a much bigger thrust, and you get much bigger velocities, and you get to, as I said, there's a story in Wired, how if this M drive actually was perfected at the current levels of performance, the micronewtons. By the way, you might explain what a newton is for folks who don't remember.
Oh,
go ahead.
Well, it's pounds. I don't have the conversion offhand. Yeah, sorry.
So, one of us will Google frantically. The point is, it's basically the weight of a feather, all right? But if you put a lot of feathers together, you wind up with something that's significant. So I'm not sure I see. Today, in response to the hacker article we're going to talk about, a number of physicists who are kind of known for unusual positions and kind of forward-thinking, out-of-the-box physics, like Eric Davis, they came out and they were brutal against this article.
I know Eric. I respect Eric. He also is brilliant. Brilliant.
Right.
I mean, I cannot say enough about how smart he is. But one of the things, he works with Hal Puthoff. One of the things that troubles me is I get the impression that they have more and more of a not invented here syndrome. If this was their device, I think that he might be saying something a little bit different about it. Now, it sounds kind of accusatory to say that, but again, I mean, brilliant man that he is also very committed to what they are pursuing, and sometimes I feel like that's at the expense of other innovators' ideas. And again, Timar is no slouch. He is a brilliant man.
Now, explain
that word over and over again.
Explain who Timar is.
Well, again, Dr. Martin Timar. Dr. Martin Timar was involved with studying Eugene Poglanov's work. See, when you boil it all down, if you're talking about real-world research into warp drives or anti-gravity, and you're talking about people who are credible scientists, there's probably 30 people in the world. And they all know each other. They all know each other really well. They've all read each other's papers. They build off each other's ideas. And I think that's one of the reasons that stuff like the EM drive is starting to get some viability now. One of the things that we've seen is a shift in physics. It's one of those very subtle shifts over the last decade or so, where I remember it was 2006, and I think it might have been Eric Davis who wrote it. It was the very first paper on applied brain theory. Now, that may sound really, I don't know, may sound really like nothing to most people. But the idea was, see, one of the reasons that we say, well, you can't go faster than light, you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't violate conservation of momentum, there are all these things that you quote-unquote can't do in physics. And that comes out of the old models. That comes out of relativity, it comes out of quantum mechanics, it comes out of the stuff that we've been looking at for the last century or so. Well, you get into string and brain theory, where you're looking at hyperdimensional physics, right? Where you have multiple dimensions.
Let me stop you there. When you said brain, I went automatically to neuroscience. That is such a misrepresentation of how that word should be pronounced. It should be bran, not brain.
Oh, yeah.
And see, that bran implies a plane, which is what a bran is. By calling it a brain without the pictures, I zapped right into. I'm thinking Eric Davis in neurosciences. What in the world was he? I mean, he's a brilliant guy. Sorry about
I
that.
think it's short for the word membrane. I think
exactly. So, but it should not be pronounced brain, because it is a membrane. It is supposed to be a hyperdimensional surface on which we live, as opposed to another universe which is on a matching hyperdimensional surface. And when the two touch in a higher matrix, in a higher dimensional state space, stuff happens. In fact, that's supposed to be the so-called Big Bang, is when our membrane, our brain, our bran, touched another one, and then all kinds of other phenomena flow from that in terms of one of these models, which I find kind of interesting. How would you test it? You can't get outside the system to see the two membranes floating together in this higher realm. But it is a nice idea.
Yeah, it's a very interesting idea. I mean, it solves a lot of these problems.
Which hooks back to White's idea of how the M drive works, because I've been following the incredibly detailed and at times extremely tedious discussion on NASAspaceflight.com. In fact, that's one of the links we should have put up tonight so people can actually follow this M drive discussion. What you have are a whole bunch of professionals and amateurs and ordinary folks, and for a while people from the EagleWorks consortium, all exchanging equations and papers and ideas and theories and projections of how the M drive within Maxwell's equations, the canonical Bible of electromagnetic theory given to us from the 19th century by James Clerk Maxwell, how this is supposed to function within the realm of Maxwell's equations. Well, if you follow the conversation on NASAspaceflight.com, which I have now for months and months and months, and it actually extends back years, there is no consensus by the mainstream theory people in any way that Maxwell's equations can explain how you can have a sealed metal box and you pump energy into it and it moves.
Well, isn't that just scientific arrogance, though? It's scientific arrogance to say that
I think it's more like scientific fear. No, Tim. I think it's fear, because there is a real palpable fear among some of the participants when they're typing, and you read over months these stream of consciousness conversations. There's a real fear of bumping up against the fact that we don't know everything.
Yeah, we don't.
And that our laws are not laws. They're merely suggestions to what the universe is really trying to do. And the closed-mindedness of people who are viscerally and emotionally angry that this technology might violate what they think of as the laws of physics is really emblematic, I think, of why a whole bunch of advances in the human condition have been stymied and stifled by the so-called invisible suppressors, be it the secret government or the secret corporations or the secret Illuminati or the secret anybody. There is a willingness by a lot of people, Tim, not to want to change.
And I've heard quotes. I can't remember the famous one, but I've heard several quotes from very famous scientists, and lots of folks requote those scientists, right? They get passed around, where they say, in science, never say anything is impossible, right? And then they use examples like the Wright brothers. That's a pretty obvious example. The thing that interests me about that is the same scientists who will say that, they'll say never say anything is impossible in science, except this, except that. And the thing that gets me is it's 2015. I mean, you've seen example after example after example of the impossible being done. Not only is it done, it's done easily, right? It's done by guys who build bicycles. All of a sudden they can fly, And, after seeing that, you would think that the status quo would stop with some of the impossible stuff. And yet, I have a document in front of me. I have a webpage up. It's a Science Alert story where the title of it is Independent Expert Confirms that the Impossible EM Drive Actually Works. And then the article, the lady who wrote it, Fiona MacDonald, I think she uses the word impossible 10 different times in this. So it's impossible, and there it is working.
On that note, let us take a small break, and we'll come back, and we'll pick up on the impossible. Don't go away.
Told me for several months that you're just getting more and more excited about it. So,
well, not only is there evidence from Shire and the Chinese of really significant developments in this area, but even the EagleWorks folks, and it's looking, I mean, one of the commentators on the NASA spaceflight.com website in this conversation, which is devoted to the EM drive, made the comment that if they had taken to do everything wrong so they would get no results, they couldn't have put together a better piece of hardware and tested it in a more arcane fashion to demonstrate that it didn't work. But even after doing all that, the EagleWorks device does work. It actually produces anomalous thrust when everything else is taken into account, and the thrust is consistent with other theoretical models that have nothing to do with Maxwell. And it's just fascinating to see how the NASA people seem to be totally stuck on Maxwell, and they're not willing to go beyond, although I guess you could say White appealing to the 0 point as a mechanism whereby this drive kind of hooks in, or it attaches itself to the invisible fluidic process of an ether. That could be going beyond Newton, or not Newton, but Maxwell. But they're still trying to use the Maxwell EM equations to develop predictions, and the predictions simply are not there.
Well, this goes back to the model, right? It's the model of physics, and the problem is, mainstream physics, it allows that model to close them off to the possibilities, and I think that's one of the reasons that, again, the applied string, the applied brain theory, I think that's one of the reasons that that's so remarkable, because you're starting to have these early mathematical attempts to describe things like this, where it works, it makes sense. It's not complete yet. It's not a complete scientific model. It's still kind of being worked out. But it goes beyond this very limited conservation model where you say that's impossible. It can't be done. The end.
Look, let us switch gears just a little bit. If these guys are right, if Sonny and his team and the other independent researchers, including the DIY, do-it-yourself DIY crowd, and there have been a couple of replications of engineers that have actually put some of this stuff together and done it in their living room and put the results on YouTube. If all this is actually real, if it actually works, it will totally, and I mean irrevocably and totally, revolutionize anything we can think of in terms of space. Getting there, going places, trip times, what you can take, what you can bring back, with the kind of sampling and exploration you could really do with the solar system, and all of the ancient stuff that's out there just waiting. I mean, when you look at these Pluto images, Tim, you just drool for the idea of a technology that could get you there, as the Wired article said, in 18 months with this technology as opposed to 10 years.
Yeah, and I think developing the technology also, it starts with EagleWorks. It starts with small, specialized organizations like that. Once they find things like this, it's going to percolate out into that DIY community. Lifters were a perfect example. Lifters were something, the Beefield-Brown effect, right? What really got me into this area, what kind of inspired me back in 2002, that was something where it dates back 100 years, over 100 years. But what brought it into the 21st century was NASA had done some research on it. They'd had some interesting results. They'd published it, and the DIY community, which is everywhere, right? It's thousands and thousands of people, and they all communicate online, and they've all got their own unique spin on how they want to test things. Well, these folks went out there and started building them. And so I would suspect that with Sonny, once he reaches a certain level of results, you'll start to see, like in the past, other projects like this, you'll see 3 people, 5 people, 8 people pick it up. You have a close-knit group. Once they start to see results, then you'll start to see just an explosion, And you'll also see a tremendous amount of diversity because everybody wants to try their own things with it. And so all of this stuff where, like, if NASA if they want to run 5 different tests, it may cost them some ungodly sum of money because they have to do these tests a specific way and they have to, run them in parallel and all that. Well, with the DIY movement, you're basically able to test all of these different ideas for free. And then what EagleWorks could do is basically cherry pick the ones that produce the best results, bring those back and build off them.
Well, there are 2 things. One is at the end of this month, July, according to the timetable that one of the participants put on the NASA spaceflight.com website before headquarters told them to, cut hailing frequencies. You can't talk to those folks. You got to do this all in secret and maybe publish a paper, but do not talk to the great unwashed. Don't talk to the Vox Populi. For God's sake, don't talk to the people who are interested in what we're doing, because that might actually increase our funding. We don't want that. Am I being a little over the top?
It's interesting, isn't it? They do seem to have this.
Well, it's so counterintuitive. Look, NASA is always poor-mouthing on the Hill. They always want more money. How can we do a space program on the cheap? How can we build revolutionary rockets and reusable spacecraft and go to Mars and set up moon bases if we don't have any money? Then they're working on something that would give them an access to the American people's psyche and consciousness and to envision themselves going into space someday, and they do everything they can to downplay and suppress any hint that they're actually looking seriously, scientifically, with good engineering at these extraordinary possibilities. It's really maddening.
It's odd. It's almost as if...
Odd? It's maddening. It's almost like, again, they're designed to fail. In other words, if you create a demand in public consciousness and then you don't fulfill the demand, but you make it appear that you can't fulfill the demand because the physics just isn't there, people will go away because it's NASA thinking that it doesn't work, when in fact you've got the English guy, Shire, and you've got the Chinese folks at the Chinese Academy of Sciences who have independently both produced devices with much higher power thrust levels than the NASA people, and yet the NASA people are not, until this month, deciding to duplicate, rivet for rivet, what Shire's original 15-year-old device did almost 20 years ago.
Well, my hope is just that nothing shuts this down, nothing derails it. And I think,
you mean at NASA or overall?
Well, I think both, but also the other part is, there are always bumps in the road with experiments like this. And so, I think that folks who are following this story should just kind of be prepared for that. It's never linear progress. It's always start and stop, and sometimes you take 2 steps back, So, but it seems like it has the elements of there being something there. You have some really good scientists doing good scientific work. They feel like they're onto something, and they're getting results that they can't explain, results that are outside of the background noise, right? Because with these experiments, you always have background noise.
You always have background noise in anything.
Yeah. So,
the ideal way to test this would be to take the same setup that Shire had used in England and the Chinese used in Beijing a few years ago, put it into a spacecraft, a satellite, put it into orbit, and turn it on and see if the damn orbit changes. If the orbit changes and is not due to atmospheric, resistance or magnetic effects from the Earth's magnetic field or solar particles from the solar wind or the Van Allen belt shimmying or pinging or resonating, then depending upon the thrust of your drive and the height of your orbit, it should be pretty obvious within hours that this thing is thrusting on a vector that there's no possible way that orbit could be changing by itself because every other force would be minuscule by comparison. That would be the only test I think the mainstream would buy, because these lab tests, if you look at the commentaries, there's always people picking holes in what they found and what they have published and what they believe they have produced, so that you never reach a resolution. It's always at the level of an academic discourse and conversation, but there's no real-world practical for the average taxpayer. This is it. This is how it works. Excuse me, and this is what we can do with it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think one of the things is, definitely the development of some kind of a model, even if they don't have, a complete new model of physics, which is absolutely
all right. Let me interrupt you there. People are going to hate this because they say, "Why don't you let your guests talk?" Because I get ideas sparked by my guests talking. Let me hit you with this one. Davis, in the most bizarre paragraph I've ever read, said that the main flaw with the paper that we're talking about, Timer and what was the other guy, Fielding or Field?
Yeah.
The one that was in Hackers. The reason that he could not accept it is because they had no theoretical basis for the phenomenon they were describing in terms of their experimental measurements. Now, when in hell did science have to have a theory to explain a phenomenon before you cataloged appropriately the phenomenon?
It was graduate student George Fielder.
Yeah. Well, you got to have a theory that explains it?
I unfortunately I chalk that up to not invented here. That's kind of where I chalk that comment up. But
so Davis is making a political comment. We didn't think of it, so you guys can't be right.
That's kind of what it feels like. I mean, it's
I guess you're not going to be invited to Davis for dinner anytime soon.
Science is observational first, right? You start with what you can observe and you try and explain it.
Well, that's the only logical way science can ever function. There's a zillion things we don't understand. You mean to tell me, Dr. Davis, that in order to even begin to consider them, we have to have a theory for why there's this blinding flash of light, and then a few seconds later we hear this boom?
Well, one that, in fact, I'm working on trying to get Paul Murat on, my friend Paul Murat. He used to run the STAFE conference, the Space Technology Applications International Forum. He was in charge of Section F. And actually, Timar Davis...
That sounds ominous.
Well, it was part of a large... It was out in your neck of the woods, out in Albuquerque. One of the large scientific conferences there, and they had a section that was dedicated to breakthrough propulsion. Paul, after that conference ended, they shut that conference down. The larger conference went away. He did a replication of the Searle effect generator, which is spinning rotors. And folks who are into this area are all familiar with Searle.
But you can't assume anybody is, so describe the Searle effect.
Well, the Searle effect is it's kind of challenging. It's kind of like wheels within wheels.
No, it's not. It's rotation, rotation, rotation. Searle built a device, an electromagnetic device that spun. And he noticed, oddly, that not only did it spin, but it began putting out more energy than it was putting in. Then the damn thing took off and yanked the wires out of the wall and just kept going, and could be past Pluto by now. We don't know.
Yeah, and it had a bunch of interesting, what I would call
This was in the 1960s, by the way, and 70s.
Well, so Paul Murat built a replication of this. He's not the only person. Several people have built replications. They've all noticed interesting things. With his, though, this was, I think, 2011, 2012. They did several tests on it, and they found that it lost weight.
Yeah.
Which was, very interesting. And it was carefully controlled science, and they published papers about it. So what interests me about that and the EM drive and things like that is it's not just one experiment. It's anomalies all over the place, and they're all hinting at the same thing.
And they've been going on for decades. And then you say to yourself, if you live in a free market society where the best ideas float to the top because people can make money with them, if you could cancel gravity even partially, think of trains, think of 18-wheelers, think of cargo ships, think of cargo airliners, think of all the ways we move stuff from one position to the other on the planet, and the amount of fuel costs and energy costs and mechanical costs and human costs that moving all this stuff for 7 billion people demands of the economy and the world's resources every year. If we could replace all of that with a sled that you could load up with a whole, let's say 2 or 3 tons of gear, and then just with a push of a finger move it across a shop floor or a warehouse floor to where the customers were, or the repository of other materials was, the revolution in that area alone, physical transport of stuff from point A to point B, should have been an incentive for unlimited government or corporate or private or garage inventor or somebody to bring something like this to market. And yet for more than 50 years, more like 70, no, more since the 20s, we've been living in this quasi, is it real? Does it work? Who's doing it? Who's suppressing it? In other words, we're no better really today almost than we were back when T. Townsend Brown was doing his stuff and trying to get the Navy interested.
It's interesting, too, when you look at other aspects of science, when you look at other branches of science, right? I mean, when you look, you're talking, when this stuff started to really catch on, 1920s, 1930s, the idea kind of got out there. Rockets were still kind of a dream, and people were talking about anti-gravity. They were talking about warp drives, primitive ideas at least, faster-than-light travel. But you have to look at where society was, and it's changed so much. I mean, like, as much as people hate GMOs, look at the fact that we can genetically modify organisms. Look at the fact that we can do quantum teleportation of atoms. I mean, look at the state of electronics, the state of computers. We truly have moved forward light years in most of those sciences, but like you just said, when it comes to breakthrough propulsion, when it comes to warp drives, it's still, maybe there's something there. Right?
The major area which would totally transform human civilization and allow us to be human for each of those 7 billion people tonight is being kept from us by apparently a dedicated, concerted effort to swat down each effort that arises out of that sea of foment and intellectual curiosity. And every time a technology which could break the bonds, the surly bonds of Earth, comes up for review, there are a lot of people like Eric Davis saying, oh, come on, nothing to see here, go away, move along, totally boring. And it's not true. I mean, Paul LaViolette was on the other night. He's got a stunning book on anti-gravity technology going back to the 20s and 30s and 40s and 50s of government efforts to create demonstrable, workable technologies which could take us from here to Pluto in months. And no one knows about it.
Yeah, there's a lot out of there. Well, and that's just the stuff that Paul was able to find that was documented too. Again, like with Paul Murad in this paper, his replication experiment, stuff like that doesn't get documented. It kind of gets lost to the sands of time.
So obviously, if he will come on the show, I got to talk to him about his duplication of the Cyril experiment.
Yeah, I'll work on getting him to come on the show, and and not to single him out, he is one of many, many, many folks who have seen anomalies here and there, I mean, these devices. One of the things with American Anti-Gravity, one of the things that I found was you almost have like a taxonomy of effects and side effects, and the Searle effect is definitely like. It's the progenitor of a lot of these. But, like, for instance, a lot of these gravity modification devices, the story is that they run cold, Mm-hmm. And so people have suggested maybe they're actually sucking energy out of the environment. Maybe they're transferring energy from the 0 point, and that's why they cool the environment around them. There's no good reason for it. It's just
No. There's a wonderful reason. Do you know what it is? No, apparently not.
No.
It's the dividing line between entropy and negentropy. The hallmark of the hyperdimensional torsion field experiments that I've seen and the theoretical modeling that I've seen and the actual measurements we've done with the Accutron is that you're looking at that point between order and chaos, between consistent rhythmic resonant patterns and disorganized randomness. And so when you turn on one of these devices, one of the hallmarks that applies across platforms, whether it's a so-called free energy device or an anti-gravity device or a torsion field generator device out of some of the experiments in the old Soviet Union, the common thing is that they all cool down because their behavior is more ordered in this environment and not random thermalization, and so they are cold. They are heat sinks as opposed to heat sources in our three-dimensional reality, and that's how you know you're dealing with something that's real.
Amazing. See,
and you didn't know that. Wow.
I put together kind of a taxonomy of it, and that was one of many, many things. But some of it I've always wondered about. But that doesn't make sense.
It's one of the signatures. In fact, let me give you a really wild story. You remember the story that Art had on about the guy that was walking his dog in the woods, and he came across a UFO hovering in the woods, and it looked like a black obsidian slab with some kind of very futuristic angles and planes, and it was absorbing light, and it was pitch black. And he, as part of the story, this thing killed his dog, and he attacks the creature that comes from this object. And the story is very long and complex, and I can't remember his name at the moment. But everyone is accused of it being a hoax. Oh, he hoaxed this. Oh, he made up that. He's, nothing about it's real. The thing that struck me about the story, and given that his background was, I think he's a doctor, so physics would not be his strong suit, is that he said when he touched it there in the woods, hovering over the ground, it was cold. It was so cold it burned his hands. Now that is such a subtle piece of real physics, of a hyperdimensional negation of gravity, because you're basically dealing with a 0-point order within a matrix around something that's causing a bubble in the Earth's gravity field, whatever. In other words, you're somehow reducing the entropy so the object appears to be sucking energy into it as opposed to giving it out. And that's what this guy reported, and it was the first thing about that story that made me wonder at all the pushback, all the backlash against Dr. Reed. That was his name. His name was Reed. And I just wondered, was it because it was so real that the forces that are trying to keep us from realizing this stuff is going on and exists were so out there to make sure that that story never got legs and never made the rounds, that they basically taken him to the cleaners. And few people think that Reed's story is real now, except I wonder about the hovering, cold object that should not have been cold in anybody's known physics.
Yeah. It's these things are out there, and it's, I spoke with, again, this is another pretty high up NASA fellow. This is a while back, and I'd asked him about the robot missions, and at the time I was reading Ray Kurzweil's Age of Spiritual Machines, and I remember this fellow telling me not only were they familiar with it, but they were all fans of Ray Kurzweil. And he said, that's one of the reasons that we're promoting robot exploration so heavily at NASA, is because, we believe that machines are man's children, and they'll go out there and explore. They'll do what we can't. And on the one hand...
That sounds like no fun.
Yeah, there's on the one hand, it makes sense, and there is kind of a beauty to it. But on the other hand, it's profoundly sad, because what they're saying is we're never going to figure this stuff out, so we'll just use robots to do it, because they don't age. They can take 1 million years to get there. They'll send back their reports. That's sad, and
it's the ultimate technologist taking over.
Yeah, I mean, so. I think that for me that kind of showed that they're they're kind of stuck within their limitations. They've said to themselves, "This is what we can do, and we can put this on a project schedule and manage it." Right?
See, now this next part comes under, comes under the heading of "Don't do this at home." But what these do-it-yourselfers are doing as part of this NASAspaceflight.com conversation is they're taking apart microwave ovens. They're taking the heart of the oven out, called the magnetron, which is the electronic gadget which actually creates the microwaves that cooks your food, and they're very dangerous, so you don't want to do this at home and don't want to do this if you don't know what you're doing, because you'll kill yourself. The high voltage alone will electrocute you, so you don't want to be taking apart a microwave oven. Please do not do this. But the guys, the engineers who actually know what they're doing, are using these readily available components to assemble these test prototypes. And they're using bathroom scales and pendulums and torsion pendulums and other suspension techniques to measure the small forces. And separate from NASA, separate from the EagleWorks crowd, they're producing independent replications, and they're spreading the idea through social media. So then the question becomes, if the official crowd, like at NASA, can't really politically replicate this, because then all bets are off, they have to go through the motions, but they can't really come out with a workable device, what can we do to help the do-it-yourself crowd, given that we now have a platform? We've got websites, we've got radio, we've got listeners, we've got 1 million people calling. Don't call yet because I can't answer the phones yet. We will announce after the top of the hour that we're going to go to open lines, and then we will try that part of this experiment. But the point is, if we can assemble a constituency outside of government, which, by the way, can't even take private money to augment the NASA funding that they're not getting to carry out these critical experiments, which I find really interesting, we might be able to make progress separate or in parallel to these official efforts, and that's one of the things that I wanted to explore tonight. And we are back. Okay, we're going to try this experiment now. Tim, you're all set, right? I've got a bunch of numbers flashing up on this screen. I have no idea what's going to happen if I hit this thing, so let's hit it and see what happens. Okay. I guess it went away. Okay. So until the next one comes up, let me announce what the numbers are. If you want to call us on a regular number, you call, or on a regular phone, I should say. The number for the Land of Enchantment, the other side of midnight, is 505-796-8802. This is, by the way, also on the other side of midnight website. 505-796-8802. Or if you are on Skype, and I would strongly, as Art does, recommend that you put Skype on your smartphone so that you sound really cool, because there's always that difference in level between the host and the callers or participants outside of the studio. With Skype, it's kind of like we all sound very similar, which is important for your argument, so you might want to put Skype on your device. The new catchword now is device, so when you call, make sure you turn down your device, otherwise there'll be this weird feedback thing, and I'll be as unhappy as Art is when he gets that kind of a call. So all this information is on the website. The Enterprise Skype name is Enterprise Mission. So just use Enterprise Mission in Skype to find us. You can call us on Skype by referring to Enterprise Mission. And let's just see what happens if I hit this. Turn down your device, otherwise there'll be this weird thing. You've got to turn your gadget down.
No, Richard, I have it all.
Okay. And you are?
I'm Trey in Atlanta.
Trey.
Yes.
Yeah, please keep your phone down because it'll drive you nuts.
Okay, let me plug in my headphones right next.
That's the idea. If you have headphones and a mic, that's the best way to reach us because that way the quality is really superb.
Is that any better, Richard?
Yes, much better.
I just wanted to call in and say at first I was skeptical about the show, but I'm really starting to enjoy it, and I appreciate your work.
Okay, tell me why you were skeptical. I'm skeptical, but why were you skeptical?
I've had a sort of love-hate relationship with you in the past.
Oh, tell me, come on. You got lots and lots of people listening.
Walter Cronkite thing, or Ron Cronkite thing.
Walter Cronkite, what about him?
Because allegedly, and I don't know if this is true, and I could be wrong, but he said he preferred not to be associated with you.
And where did you hear that?
Oh, it's all over Belgab and everywhere else.
Well, what else would you expect? In other words, if I have worked for NASA and I work for Cronkite and I have that credibility, having covered U.S. going to and from the moon,
right.
And that's part of my background, obviously my enemies are going to attack what they perceive to be any area that can discredit me. And by claiming that Cronkite wanted to disown me, that's kind of, it's kind of like what certain politicians are doing these days. They're doing things extraordinarily over the edge, over the boundary, over the red line, just to get attention, to get airtime. Doesn't mean it's true.
No, it's true, but it could also be a matter of perspective, working the same way with you.
In what sense?
In the sense that you could be saying that because they don't agree with me, they're opposed to me, and now stop me.
But that is axiomatic. If they don't agree and they want to stop me, that's what they're doing, right?
It's all a matter of perspective, I guess.
In other words, is there any actual documented reference to Walter saying he didn't want to be associated with our experience going to and from the moon?
I am not sure, but I would love it if I could be your cultural advisor from now on.
I have lots of people applying for the position.
Please let me be it.
And what would you do as Mr. Cultural Advisor?
Anything you need, sir.
Oh, okay. Do you have any questions for Tim, since we've got an anti-gravity guy?
A good guest, and I appreciate it, Richard.
Say again?
I said good guest, and I appreciate it.
But you don't have any questions for him?
I don't.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you what.
I'm enjoying it.
Say again?
You. I'm just letting you know I enjoy the show.
Well, thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a good evening.
You too. So I guess, let's see, I have to figure out a way to do this. Good morning. You're on the other side of midnight.
Awesome. Oh, I'm so glad I got through. Have you heard of Eric P. Dollard?
Eric Dollard. Why does that name ring a bell? Tim, do you know Eric Dollard?
No, I'm not familiar with that at all.
Well, thank God I got through then. This gentleman basically has put the mathematical theory to Tesla's work, like straight line energy. And this guy used to work for RCA. He lived in and had the lab, Marconi's first. I'm sorry, I'm nervous. Marconi's first radio lab. And, just like anybody who discovers amazing things like this, he's homeless, he's broke, death threats. But, one of the theories, and this is why people go, oh, this guy's crazy, is because he includes this concept of time, anti-time, space, and anti-space, as well as magnetism and gravity, north-south pole, and et cetera. If you do a search for him, you'll get all kinds of information. He has his theories right out there in the public, how he arrived to them, taking complex calculus, bringing it to simple algebra so even I can understand it.
How do you spell his name?
Dollard, D-O-L-L-A-R-D, Eric P. Dollard.
Gosh.
He's since all his labs have been blown up. He's had 3 labs destroyed. He sits there and picks up shortwave radio by sticking a wire in the ground. Things that are supposedly not supposed to happen.
Well, no, wait. The ground wave is a well-known phenomenon in radio, radio. Do me a favor. Send me a link with some of his stuff, and I'll take a look at it.
PES Wiki, the Power Energy Systems Wiki, Eric Dollard, boom. You will not believe what you'll find.
Okay.
His PDF.
Please. Let's give some other people a chance here.
Sure. I will send it to your email.
Excellent. Thank you much.
Great show. Thank you.
Okay, let's add someone else here to the conversation. You are on.
All right, thank you, Richard. This is Nathan. I'm calling from Austin, Texas.
Hi, Nathan.
Yeah, I actually had a question for the guest.
Tim, you're up.
Yeah. What can I help you with?
Okay, we were talking about NASA funding earlier. And like a lot of innovation has come from NASA, but it seems like recently, like the budget has been cut tremendously. And if you thought maybe, I don't know, maybe they were funding some stuff through the black budget, so we don't have access to it since NASA is fairly, they can occasionally be open.
My understanding is that the budget cuts with NASA, and this may have changed because I haven't kept a close eye on it, but my understanding was those budget cuts really started to get deep during the Iraq War. So this goes back to the Bush years, and I'm not sure if any of that has been restored under the Obama administration, but again, from what I've heard, it went back to wartime budget cuts, and they really just started to slice things to the bone, and in a few cases they took things way beyond that, and they just said, we can't afford to do this or that or the other thing anymore. That's kind of what happened to Breakthrough Propulsion Project. Mark Millis was a little controversial in his own way.
Just a tad, yes.
But
he's also jumped on this bandwagon claiming there's nothing to the EM drive research.
Oh, I wasn't aware of that.
Yes, he and Davis both. I'm seeing, and remember, they're both connected either directly or peripherally to NASA. In other words, is the whole NASA Eagle Works effort what we would call a false front western town or a Potemkin village, a public effort that looks like it wants to achieve something, and when it doesn't, everybody will say, sadly, oh, that's such a shame that they were so well motivated. They really wanted to change spaceflight, but the physics just isn't there. In other words, are we again, like Lucy, going to have the football yanked away from us?
I had another question for the guest, if you could be
go ahead.
Answer for me. I'm not sure if you listened to the Art Bell show before.
Yes, I did.
On the news, they had his news segment.
Mm-hmm.
It had something about like mining on the moon to establish the moon base, and I'd just like to get your reaction on that, and I'll take it off the air. Thank you.
Okay. Do you want me to answer, or do you want Tim to answer?
Both, please.
Okay.
I'd like to get both your reaction.
Okay, Tim, you want to go first?
I haven't heard any news stories about that. Although I've heard various ideas. Mining helium-3 to produce, fuels. And another idea was some folks have said that there may even be water inside of the moon, and you might be able to mine that and use that to support.
We know there's water. The microprobe analysis now of some of the Apollo samples have shown in the lavas and the fire fountains of material that came up for like 30, 40 miles below the current surface, there's ample water in the moon, which completely knocks into a cocked hat the idea that the moon was formed by a bigger planet, like a Mars-sized planet, smashing into the Earth billions of years ago and spalling off material that then coalesced to form the moon, because in that collisional process, the temperature of all the stuff would have been so high that in zero gravity and the vacuum of space, the chunks, before they reassemble themselves into the moon via gravity, would have been red hot or white hot from the collisions, and they would have simply radiated their water vapor into space. It would have evaporated, it would have sublimed, it would have been bubbled out of the lavas, and so there should have been very little water accumulated into the moon. And the fact that we've now found in the old Apollo samples, particularly where they sampled this stuff coming up from 30 miles down at the Apollo 17 site, the so-called orange soil, I guess you remember that, right? That stuff is loaded with water, which means, yes, the moon, if you go to the right place, not only has deep water, fossil water, if you will, but there's other evidence from other missions that there is a surface water available in huge frozen lakes and ponds at the poles, to where you could totally transform and radicalize the economics of building any kind of moon base. And that's what this story is basically referring to, that NASA, as part of its plans, is thinking about this. Well, the only way that's going to work is if there's some political transformation to where suddenly space is really important, and we have to have really real space drives to keep it important. And do you begin to see a kind of a convergence, Tim, that these things are coming out again together, like we're being prepped for what is about to occur?
Yeah, the water in the moon, that's new to me, but that is a remarkable discovery. And it just shows, I don't know, I'm a little old-fashioned, but I've been asking myself for a while, why don't we start there? Why don't we start with a colony on the moon, which is back in the olden days, that was what you used to see in the science fiction books, right? A moon base,
Well, but because it was logical. Zubrin, Robert Zubrin, right?
Yeah.
The Mars guy. He wants to do what he calls Mars Direct. He wants to forget the moon and go directly to Mars, develop an infrastructure, send spacecraft on one-way trips, land them remotely, create out of CO2 in the atmosphere, methane, then use the methane as a fuel to combine it with oxygen that you would bring from Earth, stuff like that. But he wants to bypass the moon, which to me, even if we did not know what is on the moon waiting for human exploration to blow everybody's minds in terms of an extraterrestrial reality and the libraries, if the moon was a dead place like it's been portrayed in all the literature from NASA, it still would be a incredibly important and, I frankly think, incalculably valuable stepping stone to develop a space infrastructure to someday go to Mars.
Yeah,
because it's only 3 days away using rocket technology, and it's only a few hours away if you develop some of these alternative, real space drives that hook into the ether, the 0 point, the torsion field, whatever you want to call it. That's where the future is, provided NASA doesn't get in the way by claiming it measured it and there's nothing there.
Well, it also goes back to dropping things in and out of a gravity well. See, and if you go to Mars, you're stuck in another gravity well, and that doesn't mean it's not a great place to explore. It just means that if you're going to have infrastructure, if you're going to have a transportation hub, the moon's a heck of a lot better place, because then you can use a railgun to eject things into orbit, or, if you're stuck with rockets like NASA seems to be, then you can use less rocket fuel to get off the moon.
Well, all right. Before we take another call, let me ask you this question. Do you see any political change? In other words, am I being too hard on the EagleWorks crowd? Do they really do it backwards because they didn't know any better? In other words, why didn't they duplicate Scheuer's work and the Chinese as opposed to developing something which produces almost zero thrust compared to these other examples?
There are a lot of things that go into developing those experiments, and sometimes they'll do it that way just so that they can get what they might believe would be cleaner experimental data, or maybe they wanted to measure it with computer systems, or they had to hook it up to specific types of equipment to measure it. I mean, there are a lot of little things that go into it. And some of them might just come down to budget, too. I mean, from what I understand, their budget is super, super tight. It might even be out of pocket for the most part.
And they're set up institutionally so they cannot accept any outside money. In other words, you can't create a Kickstarter fund for the EagleWorks crowd at NASA working on anti-gravity space drives, which is what they should do. I mean, do you remember something called the Viking Fund years ago?
Yeah.
There was a guy, there was actually a group in California, I was part of it, and when NASA had kind of called it quits with the regular mission of Viking 2, Viking 1 by that time had died, it had stopped transmitting, but Viking 2 was still transmitting strongly, but the NASA budget was zeroing out, so they weren't going to provide any more money for the scientists, the DSN, the downlink, the data processing, nothing. So this group in Northern California, before the internet, before the web, before social media, they basically passed the hat, and they collected, I believe, something between $50,000 and $100,000, and they gave it to NASA in a big ceremony at the National Aeronautics and Space Museum there on the mall in Washington. Why couldn't something like that be ginned up now? Is there anything in the law? And I've been reading the NASA spaceflight commentaries, and the folks there tend to think that it's illegal. In fact, the people that were representing EagleWorks, like the one guy you and I talked about, I don't want to mention his name in case he doesn't want his name mentioned. He went on and said, yes, they were prohibited from accepting public monies, but there's this precedent that the Viking Fund actually kept the Viking spacecraft alive on Mars years after it was going to drop dead by being turned off because NASA was pulling the switch. So there is a precedent for doing private-public cooperation, and I would think there could be nothing more important than to develop a real anti-gravity space system that would get rid of rockets that would give us access to our heritage all over the solar system.
Well, and if they're prevented from accepting money, maybe there are alternatives. I mean,
well, what we need is a Washington lawyer. If we have any Washington lawyers, call in, who actually understands the law, and if there is a way that NASA could, in fact, be the beneficiaries of a Kickstarter campaign specifically devoted to getting rid of rockets and developing real space technology. So let's see. While we're thinking about that, I'm going to go and take another call. Let me give out the numbers again. If you want to call us from just a regular phone or a smartphone, the number is 505-796-8802. That's 505-796-8802. The Land of Enchantment this morning. And if you want to call on Skype, it's Enterprise Mission. That's our Skype name. And we'll see who is on the line now. Hello?
Yes, hello.
Other side of midnight. Turn down your device.
Okay.
Mute your device. We've now changed phones and computers to devices. And we are back. Tim, are you there?
Yeah, I'm still here.
We have someone who has been actually stalking me for many years, and he got through our phones tonight. I was expecting it. I thought you might want to hear some of his rants because he's not very logical and he actually is not correct on his facts. I have never participated in any video where I knew of any secret information that I have not freely made public from the beginning of this investigation. So, why don't we go and see if we get another call here?
David,
from Minnesota.
Richard, I'd like to talk about a couple of things here on the moon, actually.
Okay.
The castle that's miles high, the monolith, and the picture, I don't know if it was the Chinese, some other government guy, they got a huge tower that's in dark mission. It sticks out of the moon like a sore thumb.
I think you're referring to the thing we call the Shard, which was photographed on Lunar Orbiter 3 in the 1960s.
It was in dark mission, and
So what is your question about the images?
how come no one's talking about it?
Well, we've talked
Why
about it. You mean why mainstream media or press doesn't talk about it?
Yeah, mainstream media, Fox News, CNN.
I don't know. Have you asked them? I mean, I've been on CNN, I've been on Fox, I've been on MSNBC, I've been on CBS and ABC and NBC. I've been on all of them, and I've talked about this now for 30-some years. The fact that there is more of the culture talking about this now than used to talk about it, I think, is significant progress.
What do you think about Pluto?
Well, I think it's astonishing. I mean, it's obvious from the evidence that it is just mind-blowing what's on the surface when you have the principal investigator of the mission on our air the other morning describe Pluto as having a science fiction surface. What do you think that means?
Yeah, it's going to be crazy.
And they are warning. In fact, let me go to the news story here, which I think I've got queued up. Let me see. Where are we here? Okay, here it is. This appeared on the media, on the wires this afternoon, as soon as this little computer. It says, NASA tells lawmakers to brace for more Pluto secrets revealed by the mission.
Oh, wow. Like 7,000 feet up. That's going to be ridiculous when we see those pics.
Well, right? No. I never said, and no one has ever said they're going to be 7,000 feet up. They are going to be 7,000 miles up when the latest images come in from closest approach, which is about 7 times better than the ones that we have seen now. Here's the story from The Wire. Hoping to capture lawmakers' imaginations and perhaps loosen their purse strings. That's kind of an editorialization, isn't it? NASA officials said Tuesday that the new scientific information gleaned from the New Horizons mission was revolutionizing what they know about the icy dwarf planet. You think? Among other things, the mission revealed evidence of an internal ocean, atmospheric hazes, and other wonders, Alan Stern, principal investigator of the mission, said before the House Committee on Science, Space, and Technology. But when you talk about a surface which is a science fiction surface, that's a little beyond oceans and hazes and goes into the category of other wonders, wouldn't you say, Tim?
Are we going to see some domes up there?
Well, what we are seeing is ancient, massive buildings that are not domes. They're built more like the, as I said a couple of nights ago, they're built more like the hangars at Ames Research Center in Mountain View, California, except they're much bigger. I think the scale of the hangars there is on the order of half a mile in length, and what we're seeing in the Pluto imagery are structures which are 12 or 20 miles in length.
You know, Richard,
some cities, some like metropolis.
Well, yeah, each one could be each structure could contain millions of people if they're living in the kind of environment that we projected, called an arcology or an architectural ecology. So let's go on to our next caller. Thank you, sir, for calling, and I hope you will call again.
Richard.
Thanks. And who do we have on the air now?
Hello?
Hello? Turn your device down. Turn your device down. I'll tell you what, can you hold on? We're going to take a break here at the bottom of the hour, and then we will be back with the other side of midnight and with the rest of our conversation, both with Tim and with the calls.
Well, hi.
And please turn down your device, your radio, your phone, whatever you got us on, because we're hearing feedback.
Nope. Got everything turned down.
Okay.
Better?
Okay. Go for it.
Okay.
I hear my voice coming back. You don't have everything turned down. Turn it down.
I got it completely muted. The SETI Institute has come out and said that the bright spots on Ceres are actually creating and sustaining an atmosphere within the crater. Okay, well, that's just there's two other things. Last night on Art Bell, John Brandenburg has come out and said that he was in the room when the scientists discovered the atmosphere on Mars contained Xenon-129.
Mm-hmm. Xenon.
And they said Mars was nuked. It was what they had found in tests on, in the U.S.
Yeah, Xenon-129 is one of the isotopes created when you detonate a nuclear weapon here on Earth.
Exactly, and they found that in Mars' atmosphere.
Yep.
Let me just throw one other thing out there. When I was listening to the panel talking about Pluto, Alan Stern, I don't know if he meant to say this or not, but he said, talking about the material on Sputnik Planum, which there's two other large areas below that has the same kind of material, but not as much as the top one, right?
Right.
He said it's either spread by wind or by alien redistribution. And I looked and I thought he was both the
He was saying the word aeolian, which is Latin for wind. Aeolian, not alien, aeolian, which means wind distribution.
Yeah, just about getting a heart attack when he said that.
See, I'm fascinated by his comment that Pluto has a science fiction surface, because that's not the comment of a scientist referring to volcanoes or ice flows or any of the stuff we've seen. As amazing as it is, that's not science fiction. He's implying something else.
Well, that's true. I heard it too when he said that, and there's more to come, that's all I know. But the thing that's got me right now is this SETI saying that there's an atmosphere created within the crater with some bright lights in the middle, and the bright lights are actually creating the atmosphere.
Well, we're not sure. Hang on. We're not sure it's an atmosphere. What they're noticing is in the images, and I've noticed this, and Tim, you've probably seen this in the series images. Around those lights, there appears to be some kind of a scattering of light, kind of like you're looking through a bug-spattered windshield. And we've noticed this from day one. They're saying it's a haze, meaning it's gases coming out of the ground. What if it's scattering off some kind of an artificial dome-like structure on the bottom of this 60-mile wide crater?
Well, that's exactly what I'm thinking, because it's just apparently just the crater that has the atmosphere.
Yep.
Now, if that's a natural phenomenon, well, maybe, but...
Well, the question then is, how would you contain an atmosphere on an airless world, which is a vacuum, because Ceres is only 600 miles across. Its gravity field is like 0.0001, something like that. So what would contain mists or an atmosphere in one crater in a vacuum? It's more likely that it's some kind of a structure scattering sunlight, in which case, if we get closer images, and they're now spiraling down with that ion engine, and by mid-August I think they'll be about 900 miles above the surface, which is 3 times closer than we've got imagery from up till now. So will we know what this stuff is if we get pictures that are 3 times better? I don't know. I hope. I hope they'll show us.
Well, it could be that there's technology there that we don't understand yet either.
The psychology? What do you mean?
Technology.
Oh, technology. Okay. Well, yeah, obviously.
Yeah.
Obviously. In other words, if we're dealing with some kind of force field, then, as Arthur said many, many years ago, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And we could be learning magic. So let me move on to our next call. I thank you for your input tonight, and call us again.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Tim, thoughts?
You know, I'm just looking at the critter here. It's
critter.
remarkable.
The critter. What critter?
Crater.
Oh, crater. Crater. I thought you found something new.
Yeah. No. You know, I haven't seen it in a while, so I went back to look at it.
The critter, yes. We're talking about the lights in the crater on Ceres.
Yeah, the reflectivity is just amazing.
Oh, it's 100%. And if you look at the rotational movies, they've got animated videos. I don't have the links up because I didn't think we might be talking about Ceres, but we can go and find them later. If you look at the movies they've made of the approach shots, this stuff is brilliant, 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 and when it goes into darkness beyond the Terminator, the lights cut off. So it's obviously reflections, but it may be reflections powered by some kind of solar amplification. In other words, if there's a material which when you expose it to light, it absorbs and then re-radiates 100%, some super material, and then when you put it in darkness, it goes dark because it has no energy input to amplify.
You know, it'd be nice if there was something to compare it to. I mean, like, for instance, if there was, like, some ice somewhere on the surface they could compare it to and say, okay, here's the ice, here is the...
Well, there's other bright craters or bright splotches, maybe like a quarter of the way around if you look again at these rotation movies. And they look like they're ice, like they're bright, but they're not super bright like the lights are in that crater. And they're not lights. Lights implies self-powered. They're reflections because of the way they cut off at sunset and sunrise, but they're really incredibly energetic reflections, like it again, the material is absorbing energy and then re-radiating it at 100%, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah. Well, for anybody in the audience, it's Ceres, right? So it's CERES.
Yep, CERES.
Yeah.
And so this other area is an ice patch, and when they looked at it with the shortwave infrared, which is basically a temperature sensor, it's a remote temperature sense through infrared, they find that crater is cold, meaning the ice is reflecting energy away, and so the ground is cooler compared to the surrounding terrain. But when they look at the infrared thermal signature of the lights in the 60-mile-wide crater at 19.5, there's no temperature difference at all. It's like their reflection of solar energy is not changing the ground temperature around the lights in any discernible way. So there's lots of little niggling anomalies, even now, about these objects at 19.5 that let me know pretty much that we're going to find something amazing when we get down to the really low orbits, provided, of course, they tell us. So let's take another call. You up for that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. And it went away. Okay, let me click on this and see if I can answer. There we are. Hello? Hello? Okay. Can you hear us? Hello? Okay, let me try this one. Okay. Hello, you're on the air.
Hello, Richard?
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, can you speak up? I can't hear you over my radio.
And you got to turn your radio down. You got to as soon as we answer, you have to turn your radio down because otherwise you get terrible feedback. There's a delay. There's like a 30. So kill your radio. Kill it. Hide it under the couch. Turn it down all the way. Everybody, please. This is so simple. When you call, you have to be ready to get rid of your radio. Turn off your device.
Under the couch?
Whatever. Get rid of it.
Okay.
Hello? Hello? Okay, well, we lost him. You're on the air. Are you there? Hello?
Richard?
I'm here.
Hi, Richard.
Who am I talking to?
This is Chris from New York City.
Hi, Chris.
How are you? This is a great show.
Well, thank you. We're trying. If I get the technology down, it actually may sound like it's broadcast quality. What do you want to inveigle us with tonight?
Well, you've been a long-time listener and follower of Coast to Coast AM when Art was on. Now you're here with him on Dark Matter Radio Network.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious about your views on some of the other subjects Art talks about. Do you believe in ghosts? Do you believe in shadow people, cryptozoology, cryptids, that kind of stuff?
I'm me and Art is Art. And I said a week ago when we started this, the show that I'm doing is not the show that Art would do. I'm going to be having more of a series of conversations than I will be having interviews. I'm going to interview a variety of different people. I'm going to converse with them. I'm going to talk with them. I'm going to elicit their views. One of the things that's going on in the country right now that I want to get into is the current state of mainstream politics. Because if you stand outside the system and you kind of look at what's going on, both with the Republicans and the Democrats, there are some remarkable things occurring that appear to again be kind of, successful replications of the predictions of the social part, the consciousness part of the physics we've been looking at. And so I would kind of envision at some point getting into conversations about what's really driving the increasingly absolutely bizarre mainstream politics we're seeing paraded all around the country now, to the point where even mainstream commentators are saying, we've never seen this. This is unprecedented. We don't understand what's going on. Everything we thought we knew, we don't know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It really kind of, Tim, seems to be an affirmation of what the real idea of apocalypse was all about, which is revelation of unbelievable things which have been suppressed and kept secret for too long.
It is interesting. Going into this election cycle, it's just getting stranger and stranger and stranger. I mean, I've seen some of Donald Trump's stuff, and it's interesting. This is going to be a weird one.
It already is. Well, thank you, caller. Is there anything else you wanted to bring up?
Richard.
Yes?
Well, what is your take on Donald Trump? I know Art's mentioned him a lot, and do you have any take on any of the other candidates in the race?
Well, I'm fascinated by Trump because he's an outsider, he's an outlier, he's a rebel. I mean, look, we are arguing, get this, the country is now arguing about how rich one of the guys who wants the job of president of the United States actually is. Is he worth $10 billion or is he worth only $3 billion? By way of comparison, if you were to stack up dollar bills to the height of 70 miles, actually it's 67.8, that is how many dollar bills you would require to accumulate $1 billion. A stack of dollar bills 67 miles high. Now, if you want to talk about trillions of dollars, which is, national debts, other countries, gross national product, stuff like that, even a trillion, which is 1,000 billion, would be a stack of bills 67,000 miles high. So the idea that we're debating whether Donald Trump is, worth, 3 times 67 miles of dollar bills, or 10 times, so that the stack of bills would be 670 miles high, it seems kind of silly when everybody else is talking about stacks of dollar bills that would be only a few feet high in terms of their annual, income. So we're talking about a guy running for the presidency who represents the quintessence of the 1% of the 1% of the 1%. And the fact that he is leading in the Republican polls is so strikingly ironic and so strikingly odd and at disparity with all of the normal mainstream rhetoric, because in essence, the two leaders on the two sides of the Democrat-Republican spectrum represent the polar opposites of their constituencies. And who in their right mind ever expected that our politics would come down to some kind of actual choice? I'm fascinated, like Art is, by what's going on, and I can't wait to see what's going to happen next.
That's great. Thank you, Richard.
My pleasure. So let's take another call here. You're on the air.
I still want those UFO diaries.
Hello.
Hi. I still want those faces. One from, I'm hearing I still want those faces, Richard. I'm not going nowhere. I'm going to haunt you till the day you kill me, succeed this time. Everyone will know your show is a farce.
Okay. We do have our stalkers, so let's take another call here. Enterprise Mission, you're on the air with the other side of midnight.
Hello, Richard.
Hello.
Hi. Wondering what you think about 19.5 on Pluto. You think we're going to find the libraries there?
What we're finding at 19.5 on Pluto is the center of the Tombaugh Regio. It's called Sputnik Planum, meaning the plane of Sputnik. And there is this extraordinary concentration of carbon monoxide, frozen carbon monoxide, at that location on Pluto. I mean, this region is what, like 1,200 miles across or something like that? It's huge. It's a huge white ice cream cone-shaped region tilted at an angle to the equator, which is unique on the planet. And the center of it is at 19.5, which, as you know, if you're dealing with planetary physics, if you're dealing with the geology of planets, and you look at these upwelling points all over the solar system that I've talked about for the last several years, like the Great Red Spot on Jupiter, or the Hawaiian volcanic complex on Earth, or Olympus Mons on Mars. They are at 19.5 because that's where the energy upwelling point is, and it appears on Pluto that the feature at 19.5 is the quintessence of the upwelling of the energies produced inside Pluto by a combination of the dynamics with Charon, the rotation, the precessional perturbations introduced into that rotation by the other 4 moons or moonlets of Pluto, and the whole Pluto-Charon system appears to be the quintessence of hyperdimensional physics, torsion field physics in action, producing an energy source in that double planet system which is boggling the minds of every one of the scientists who has seen these images and was expecting nothing like what they're seeing. You got anything to add?
This is going to be the granddaddy of them all.
Say again?
This is going to be the granddaddy of them all.
Well, it appears they saved the best for last, which I find really cool.
Yeah.
Tim, you got any thoughts?
It just the way that hyperdimensional physics expresses itself, I think it'll be very, very interesting to see. And again, we're just starting to scratch the surface of really understanding how this physics works, right? I mean, but it is interesting, and it's old. I mean, even within our culture, torsion physics goes back to Einstein. So, what we're looking at is the new physics, right? It's the new kid on the block, but in reality, it's also really old. So we're rediscovering things, I think.
I think you're right. Okay, caller, you're on the air. What's up?
Okay, thanks, Richard, for having me on. I do have a question, and because I haven't really made up my mind yet, I think you're one of the experts to talk to about this. I was raised in a traditional education system. I went to Catholic school all the way up until 11th grade, then public school senior year, and then I went away to college, and then I went to the military and worked in the intelligence community in the intelligence gathering department, not science. But I got out and started looking at just discarding everything I've been told by the establishment. Saying, you know what, I don't believe anything. I'm going to start researching everything on my own to find out the truth. So one of the things I started looking at was the Van Allen belt, whether or not we really went to the moon, if we can escape through the Van Allen belt, if the Earth is really a spinning globe or not, or if it's a flat plane. And I even called JPL NASA and said, hey, I'm a filmmaker in Los Angeles. I'm making a movie. I need some footage of the Earth spinning on its axis out in space. I talked to a Robert Ulrich, and he said that we've never been at a low Earth orbit. We don't have any of that footage. So I'm wondering what the truth is.
What?
Is this whole space program made up? Have we? Yeah, that's what I was told.
No. Look, I can show you. I can send you a link to the Galileo footage that was taken of the Earth-Moon system as the Galileo spacecraft passed by several times to pump up enough energy to throw it out to Jupiter. This was back in the 1990s. And you can see the Earth wonderfully rotating as the spacecraft approached from millions of miles away with the sun glint and the clouds. And I think they passed by over Australia during the closest approach as part of the gravitational trajectory change. So yeah, there's tons of footage of the Earth rotating in space as seen by spacecraft.
Could you tell me just tell me a link where I can go look at that footage, and also just
why don't you? All right, do this. Google is your friend. Google Galileo video imagery of Earth during the flyby, and that should bring up and that should bring up wonderfully beautiful color views of the Earth. And that's not the only spacecraft which has had cameras taking data during the flybys.
Will you explain then the thickness of the Van Allen belts, how high up they are, and what the technology is right now with our rocket ship technology that we really can penetrate the Van Allen belt? Because as far as what I've researched, we can't get through that. It's such a highly radioactive barrier that
Steve Troy and I actually did a series called Who Mourns for Apollo some years ago, and I'm thinking I probably should find Steve's paper and put it back up on Enterprise in this kind of Apollo anniversary period. accentuate the fact that, yes, physically we could have gone to the moon and come back with the Apollo technology? Because the secret to going through the Van Allen belts is the speed. You're moving at 25,000 miles an hour, 7 miles a second. You're moving so fast that even with the relatively minimal shielding of the command module, the radiation exposure, the total body dose you get from the hour going from and coming back, from the moon, is minuscule compared to a lifetime accumulation and well below the industry standards. So these are really simple calculations. The moon hoax crowd has been trying for years to get us to not believe we went to the moon, and obviously in Dark Mission I explained what I saw at JPL when the NASA guy was squiring around the guy who was handing out the pamphlet claiming we never went to the moon. That all now makes sense in a political way of if you tell people we never went, or you give them these fake reasons why we couldn't have gone, they never ask the important question, which is, what the hell did you find there for real? And that's what we're trying to get at here.
Recently, didn't Putin come out and ask America or the United States government where the footage and artifacts are from the moon?
Exactly.
Lost them?
Exactly, and I find that remarkable. Well, we're about to end the show here. We don't have much more time. I want to give Tim...
Thank you, Richard. Keep up the good work. You're great.
Thank you much, and call again.
All right.
I don't think we have any more time for calls, Tim. You got any last thoughts for tonight?
Well, I just want to thank you.
Or this morning.
I just want to thank you for having me on. It's been definitely a pleasure. It's been a pleasure talking with you, and I hope that the EM drive continues to progress as we've seen it progress, so far.
Well, what I want to do is to make sure by shining a spotlight, a concentration of attention, that these developments don't kind of get lost in the noise. So what we're going to do with the program, even if we have a scheduled guest, I will bring in other people to comment on developments because, look, unless we develop this kind of technology, we're not leaving this little speck of dust. We are stuck here because rockets, Chinese inventions of thousands of years ago simply can't cut it, and we need these kind of real physical understandings of how space works and how you can make it work in a reactionless thruster. And that's why I'm so intrigued with Sonny White's ideas and the other folks, and I'm going to try to get Roger Scheuer on the show, and who knows, I may even try to get the gal in Beijing to come and talk to us. So on that note, Tim, I really appreciate you having joined us. We will do this again. And again, I want to remind everyone, if you are not really adjusted to this time zone, we do have archives on the right side of the Other Side of Midnight page. Just go there, subscribe, and you can participate in our conversations when it's not the other side of midnight. So until tomorrow morning, this is Dick Hoagland saying thank you for listening, and we'll see you again on the other side of midnight.